Hi, welcome to the ADHD Kids Can Thrive podcast. I'm your host, Kate Brownfield, ACC, ADHD Parent Coach, author, and parent. To learn more about me, including group and private parent coaching that I provide, visit ADHDkidscanthrive.com. Okay, let's get started. What happens when your child needs sleep, but the usual sleep advice simply does not work for their brain? For many families raising a child with ADHD, autism, or another form of neurodivergence, bedtime can become one of the hardest parts of the day. Racing thoughts, sensory sensitivity, anxiety, difficulty transitioning, and unpredictable sleep patterns can make traditional sleep strategies feel rigid or unrealistic. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Melisa Moore, a clinical psychologist who's board certified in behavior sleep medicine and the author of The Good Sleep Guide for Neurodivergent Kids. Highly recommend. Dr. Moore works at the Sleep Center at Rady Children's Health San Diego and supports children, teens, and young adults with sleep and mood concerns. She also brings the personal experience of raising a neurodivergent child and navigating sleep challenges in her own home. In this conversation, we're going to talk about why sleep can be especially difficult for neurodivergent kids, how parents can create flexible routines that actually fit their child, and what families should know about medication, supplements, and protecting their own rest. Dr. Moore, welcome to the ADHD Kids Can Thrive podcast. And so you have written this book that shows us, explains the patterns, and then also provides solutions to help figure this out for parents who are struggling with their kid in their sleep. So I thought in the book where I wanted to start is you start the story about your professional life of wanting to help kids with their sleep, but you also have this intersection in your personal life as well that really helped make it more meaningful for you. So let's start with there. If you could share the story with us.
Sure. I had been interested in this field starting from when I was a graduate student, just realizing how important sleep really is to pretty much all aspects of everyone's functioning, but especially kids.
Yeah.
And I was working at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia in the sleep center there for about 10 years before I had my first son. And so I already was deep into it. And then he was diagnosed with ADHD and autism. And so I got to see the other side of the coin as well. And although it didn't necessarily change what advice I gave, there were a few things, but I realized how difficult the sleep part is. Even if this is what you do for a living, it's
Yeah.
still difficult. And then it really has to be specific to the child. We can't just think about these general behavioral recommendations and think that they're going to work for everybody. We have to think outside the box. And so the book that I wanted, the book that I needed, wasn't out there. I needed all the information in one place. I wanted it to be science-backed, evidence-based, and to have practical solutions as well. And so that book wasn't out there. So that's the reason I wrote it. And the other reason I wrote it is I just alluded to, I do this for a living and it's still really, really hard. And so I want to validate for other parents, it's not you, it's legitimately really, really hard.
Hard, yeah. And have you found your way personally with your own child,
I have.
navigating the sleep path? Yeah.
I have. I mean, I think there are times we have our ups and downs, of course, but once I really started listening to him, to be honest, and realizing that it wasn't necessarily a behavioral issue, it was a brain biology issue. And so when he tells me I can't fall asleep right now, I believe him because of my experience being that when he says that, I know that he probably can't, and so we do a quiet activity for a little bit until he can. So I've really learned a lot from my son and my experience with him.
Yeah, and that comes through in your whole book. I have seen that. So, the second piece that I loved as I started out the book reading too is I think there's this notion in the professional world that neurodiverse kids struggle with sleep, but you really called it out as a scientific fact. And
Yeah,
all
yeah.
kids who are neurodiverse struggle with sleep. And those
We
two are not put together when a child is diagnosed.
Right, they really aren't, and I think there's a true difference between a typically developing toddler who is just exhibiting toddler behavior and a neurodiverse kid. Those sleep problems are generally different, and the approach, although it might be similar, is not exactly the same.
Yeah. Okay. And you also said, correct me if I'm wrong, if your toddler really does have a hard time getting to sleep, most likely they have a neurodiverse brain. And that's for the
Well, I
most
would
part.
So I don't wanna freak out all the parents listening to this,
Okay.
podcast, so I would say it's one sign. So if you have a toddler and they're really having difficulty sleeping, you've done all the things, you've seen a sleep specialist, and they're just not responding in the way that you think they should or your pediatrician thinks they should, I think it's worth really looking into that area of neurodiversity. When I first started working in this field, I was kind of shouting to the rooftops to everyone, you have to consider sleep in your developmental evaluations. And I still believe that, but the pendulum has kind of swung. And now it seems that people are putting off those evaluations until their child's sleep is really perfect. And that day might not be coming soon. So I don't necessarily recommend that people put off those evaluations. It's so hard when I see a family and they're coming for a sleep problem and we're working on that for, 4 months, 6 months. And then I say, I think they really need a developmental evaluation. And then it's another, 9 to 12 months to get in with somebody. So I think do it all at once. If you have any concerns about neurodiversity being an issue, just go forth with the
Yeah.
evaluation process.
Okay. So it struggles with sleep that go above the norm, and you're
Yes.
doing all the steps to
Yeah.
get them to sleep, and it's not working. It's a flag to pay
Yes.
attention to and not
Yeah.
ignore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing that's a flag is when you notice it's not dependent on anything that you do. So, you lie with your child, you don't lie with your child, no matter what, they're not falling asleep. And so maybe they have a long waking in the middle of the night. You're there, you're not there, it doesn't matter. When those things don't change with a parent being there, that's one of the indicators that there might be something more going on.
Okay. Okay. So what do we misunderstand about sleep struggles in our our younger kids? Actually, and I'm going
Yeah.
to say our teenagers too. Just children in
Yeah.
general. What are all these
Yeah.
misunderstandings?
I think the first one is that neurodiversity stops at night. Just because it's bedtime, we think, you know, those ADHD symptoms should not be there, or during the night, they somehow turn off, but they don't. They are always there. It doesn't stop just at night. The other thing that I think is important is that the expectations around sleep are not necessarily intuitive. When I ask a family to tell me their bedtime routine, more often than not, people are saying, then we go upstairs and we go to sleep. And there is so much in that one sentence. And we just assume kids should know you get into bed, you're quiet, it's dark, you stay in your
Yep.
bed until the morning. And those things might have to be directly communicated. They're not necessarily intuitive. So, those are the two things that I think about when I think about what parents might be misunderstanding.
Okay. Yeah. And there's probably a whole bunch of things inside that, which I think we'll get into a little bit
Sure.
more. But you also explained that there's like three main processes to sleep. And what are
Yeah.
those processes that we don't think about as parents?
So, the first two are our circadian rhythm. And that is internally generated by your body. That's going to happen anyway. No matter what you do, it's like a clock in our brain that says when it's light out, you should be awake and active. When it's dark, you should be asleep. In particular, with kids that have ADHD, we know that that circadian rhythm is delayed. It can be delayed. And so when our ideal bedtime is 8 o'clock on a school night and that child is really not tired until 9, we have to work around that in some way. So that's the first process. The second is sleep pressure, and that's just what it sounds like. So it's like a pressure cooker. When you wake up in the morning, you really shouldn't need sleep. Your need for sleep builds and builds and builds and builds throughout the day, and it reaches a threshold. Hopefully, when your circadian rhythm is also saying it's time to sleep, and then it pushes you over into sleep. So those are the two main ones. The third one that we don't talk about as much, we know how those things turn on sleep. There's also this idea of turning off wake. So, how do we wind down? How do we really help our children and ourselves to turn off that wake process? And the way that we do that really is things like a bedtime routine or sleep associations, cues that give our brain the message that it's time to start turning off the wake.
Okay. All right. And do you find kids with ADHD have a hard time with that wake up cycle of the wake up?
I think that there are actually yes. The shorter answer is yes. They have a harder time. But I think there really are additional reasons. There are 4 big reasons that kids with ADHD have trouble sleeping, and the first really is biology. Biology, whatever it is, usually genetics, that is causing the neurodiversity, the ADHD, also might be causing a sleep problem. We know that there are similar genes between those 2, sleep and ADHD.
Yeah.
So there's
Okay.
that. The second is the circadian rhythm that I already talked about that can be delayed in kids with ADHD. The third is that there are certain sleep disorders that are more common in people with ADHD. So the restless sleep disorders, so things like restless leg syndrome that makes it hard to fall asleep, or periodic limb movement disorder, which might make your brain wake up during the night. It's really the things that involve restlessness or movement that are more
Yeah.
common in people with ADHD. And then the last one is those comorbid things. So things like anxiety, depression, reflux, pain. That's a huge, giant basket of
Yeah.
things that can also make it harder for kids with ADHD to
See to
sleep.
sleep. So,
Mhm.
as a parent with a child, as the child gets older, when they're little as a toddler, not all these symptoms show up. Well, the symptom
Exactly.
is just it's hard for them to go to sleep or stay
Yep.
asleep or get up in the morning. That's, I think, what parents see. But then as they get older, all these other symptoms that you say are coming up, whether anxiety, depression, but even restless leg
Mhm.
syndrome.
Mhm.
You talked about constipation
Yep.
can
That's a big one.
be uncomfortable to sleep. There's so many pieces to this. Like, where does a parent start in being the detective and looking at their child, which is, why I love having on this podcast is looking at the whole person, the whole
Right.
child for what they are and not just this ADHD executive functioning piece. There's
Yeah.
just so much more to the puzzle of who your child is and what's kind of, in this case, getting in the way of their sleep,
Right.
which
Right.
impacts everything.
It impacts everything. Everything. I always tell people, if you give me any area, I bet I could tell you some way that sleep relates to it.
Yeah.
It was just so important. So, where do we start?
Yeah.
I think we start in the same place that we would start with any kid, and that is with healthy sleep habits. That doesn't mean that healthy sleep habits are gonna be your be all end all. But that's where we start. So, step 1, I would communicate expectations about sleep, whether that is something like a social story or a picture bedtime chart, some way to convey what the bedtime routine is and what the expectations around sleep are. The other thing is that bedtime routines for neurodiverse kids can be so hard. There are so many hard things involved in bedtime routines for kids. The other day I was meeting with a child who was describing teeth brushing, and for him, it was so awful. And listening to him talk about it, like the sound of the toothbrush, the sound of the water, the taste of the toothpaste, I never really thought about teeth brushing as
Yeah.
being so awful. So I think, first of all, communicating those expectations. For an older kid, you might just have a checklist. These are the things you need to do before bed. But I tend to think visuals are really helpful, but however your child learns best,
Yeah.
I would try to communicate those expectations. And then I would just work through kind of the steps of having healthy sleep habits. So, is the room dark? Is it cool? Is it quiet? Is everything that's present at bedtime there all night long? And this is a really, really important thing that I think most people don't know, and why would they? But we all have sleep cycles. So we all go through light sleep, then we go through deep sleep, then we go through dreaming sleep or REM sleep. And at the end of every cycle, our brain naturally wakes up. So everybody listening to this podcast, you, me, your kids, our grandparents, everybody woke up about 4 to 6 times last night. We generally don't know what happens because we're so good at getting ourselves right back to sleep efficiently. But if you don't have the situation you had when you fell asleep at bedtime or are used to falling asleep at bedtime,
Okay.
then at those normal wakings at the end of every sleep cycle, your brain kind of wakes up more and it's harder to get back to sleep. So, a lot of times when I see kids that have frequent wakings, it's not actually the frequent wakings, it's the inability to get back to sleep during those wakings that is problematic. And so, I think for most parents, lying down with your child or reading to them until they fall asleep or rubbing their back, those things are not a big deal at bedtime. At 8 o'clock, you're okay with it.
Yeah.
But at 2 in the
Yeah.
morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, you don't necessarily wanna be doing that. And so you wanna make sure that whatever's present at the beginning of the night is constant all night long. So if you have a sound machine, keep it on all night long. Nightlight, keep it on all night long. All those things should be the same.
Okay, that help your child go to sleep.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
remains on for the whole night.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, that's a good trick. That explains a lot for
It really
everybody with
does.
their sleep.
Yeah. I mean, that's true for adults, it's true
Yeah.
for all of us. I sleep with 2 pillows. If one happens to fall on the floor, I will I'm not waking up more, but I know that I'm awake because I have to get that other pillow.
Pillow. Yeah,
Mhm.
interesting. Okay. Okay, so with ADHD kids, actually, I wanna ask you this question because I did live this life, right? So they're getting tired. Like, they come home from school, right? They're tired, they're dragging, they need their downtime. Maybe they get outside down play or outside play, and they get revved up again. But then they're kinda tired and dragging through the day, but then bedtime comes, right? And they get amped up again,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
they're wide awake.
Yes. So, there are a few things that can cause that. Number 1 is if you miss the window. So, there really is a window. And when kids are sleepy, they don't show sleepiness the way that we do. They're not necessarily lethargic. They're irritable, they're hyperactive, they can't focus, you know? So, there's that aspect, just making sure that they're not overtired.
Okay.
And then there's another thing that we see in neurodiverse kids, which is kind of this, like, burst of energy that happens before bed. And so for some kids that I work with that have ADHD, they're jumping on the indoor trampoline right before bed, and that might seem completely counterintuitive to winding down, but for some kids, that is really helpful. And this is where we get into, parents know their kids best. If you're not sure, I would ask the people that are working with your child. So, behavior therapists, speech, even. What are the things that are helping them in other
To
situations
be
and try to
regulated? Or
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, for some kids, it's exercise. For some kids, it's definitely not exercise. I know in my house, even trying bedtime yoga did not work for us at all. It just led us down a completely awake, laughing, silly path.
Okay.
So, you just have to know your child and what
Yeah.
helps them wind down. And I think consistency in that is also really important. Our brains make associations, they take shortcuts. That's just how our brain works. And so it's associating certain things with sleep. And when those associations are consistent, it just helps us to wind down and it helps to bring on sleep or turn off the wake like we talked about. For some families, they'll tell me as soon as we start the bedtime routine, they get so upset, they're crying. And as a parent, that's terrible. As a psychologist, as a child psychologist, I'm thinking like, that's awesome. The brain is working exactly how it's supposed to.
Because they know it's coming.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so with the ADHD kids, I wanted to ask you, so stimulant medication
Yeah.
affects sleep.
Huge.
So how do parents navigate that? They want their kids to have the medication to get through school,
Yes.
or sometimes these kids need it to get through life,
Yes.
but it
Absolutely.
affects the sleep. So what do parents need to be aware of in navigating those two worlds?
I think two things. Believe it or not, 50% of kids, their sleep is actually better on a stimulant. And so part of that is being active and engaged during the day. But part of it is having enough organizational ability, executive functioning to actually go to sleep, allow sleep to arrive. And so you want to make sure that your stimulants are given early in the day if possible. You might have to do a little bit of experimenting. I know homework is a really hard time, especially for older kids. So they're coming home from school. Not only do they need a break, but they might need a booster of their stimulant.
Yeah.
And so figuring out the timing and the dose, I think oftentimes you're balancing sleep with getting through the last part of the day.
Yeah.
But I would say I wouldn't totally avoid stimulants because you're worried about sleep. Because again, at least half of kids, their sleep is better on a stimulant.
Oh, yeah. Interesting
Mhm.
statistic. Okay.
And there are stimulants there's at least one stimulant that you take at night at bedtime, but it starts being released in the early morning.
Yeah.
And so for kids that have a really hard time with morning routines, it's something to try.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I feel like dopamine is just not even moving in the morning. Like for
It
it just there's
it
zero
it
flow
relates
of the
to
neurons
yep.
to get the day going.
Yeah.
So it is a hard time. Okay, and then what role does how are screens affecting kids and their sleep, especially the
Okay.
neurodiverse kiddos?
Yes. So this is a period where when I talk about this, I always worry like I'm going to get struck by lightning or meteor is going to come from the sky because the most recent research, and I'm only talking about sleep here. I am not talking about other aspects of functioning. The most recent research tells us that all screens are not terrible for all kids sleep all the time. For some kids, a screen can be part of that winding down period. And
Okay.
so if someone comes to me and they're not using screens, I'm not recommending that they start using screens. But if you're watching Bluey as a family right before the bedtime routine, okay, if that's really helpful, okay. For some people, uh, multiple families have told me that they need something like that to just get through the bedtime routine and get to bed. So I think also if you think about teenagers, at that age, they're having more anxiety, more depressing thoughts sometimes. And studies actually show us that using electronics before bed, again, for some kids, actually helps them to fall asleep faster because they're not mired in those kind of
Oh,
thoughts.
interesting. Okay. It's
Yeah,
quiet.
and so it's really nuanced. It's
Yeah.
pretty nuanced. Again, I don't want this to come across like I am pro electronics, but if they are helpful, I would say there's nothing inherent about electronics that is ruining your child's
Yeah.
sleep. It's more
Interesting.
like if it's helpful for you, okay. You want to think about, again, getting back to those sleep associations. It's not a great idea to fall asleep to electronics because then during those night wakings, you will need
Oh,
that,
then
but
you need the sleep.
as a way to calm down, and certain electronics are better than others. TV really is not that bad, social media can be bad,
Yeah.
so it
You're
really
making me
depends.
think too, the content of what your child is watching is gonna affect that too. Like the teenagers, if they're playing those like shoot 'em up,
Yeah,
you're getting,
yeah,
you know, getting jacked up,
yeah, yeah,
or they can either be violent or they can be very competitive.
yeah,
That
that
content
or
could
they
really
make them
rev your
think too
nervous system.
much. Yes,
But if I'm
absolutely.
watching Bluey or some relaxing
Or the
shit,
British
I could
baking
see,
show,
like,
that's what they want
content is
people to
gonna
watch.
matter in this, yeah, in this guidance,
Yeah,
like,
and the main thing that impacts sleep about electronics is when it starts to push bedtime later and later and later. We hear a lot about blue light, we hear a lot about, you know, like you said, getting amped up, but the major thing that impacts sleep is when bedtime gets later. And I've actually learned this by writing my book. I've had to be on social media. I really wasn't on it before very much. And that algorithm instantly, I do not know how this works, but I would open Instagram, it would show me videos of dancing kids. It would show me, all the things that are interesting to me. It just feeds it to me and then I look up and it's an hour later. So
oh,
I get it. But that displacement of bedtime is really where you see the impact.
okay, okay. Lots of things to think about here.
Yeah, yeah. So if you have a child with a lot of willpower, which I don't know many diverse kids that well, I don't even wanna couch it as willpower, but if kids have the ability to say, like, "All right, my alarm just went off, it's time for me to stop electronics, I'm getting off, I'm
Right.
getting into bed," I think that's probably, like, 0.01%
That's a
of the
miracle if they're neurodiverse and they have that kind of self-control.
Right, right.
Yeah, okay. So that is very good guidance. Okay, so the other thing I wanna talk about is kind of what is and your book gets into more of this, but just kinda top line for this podcast that what is your guidance around using external supplements or
Mhm.
medication to help support the
Yes.
sleep to happen at a certain time and stay asleep?
So, I use research and science as kind of my North Star. And there is so much misinformation out there about supplements and sleep, particularly melatonin. And I was actually listening to your last guest who was talking about something totally different, but how the information on TikTok about ADHD in
Oh, yeah.
kids
Yeah.
is so wrong. And that's also true with melatonin. So melatonin is designed it's an antioxidant. It's actually the most well-studied antioxidant in kids. It's very well studied in neurodiverse kids. It's not very well studied in typically developing kids. So, in kids with ADHD and or autism, unfortunately in some of these studies they all get lumped together, but melatonin can be helpful at particularly at falling asleep at that winding down time and it is not addictive. The good thing about it is it doesn't change the melatonin that your brain produces when you take external supplemental melatonin.
Okay.
So your brain is not going to produce less because you're taking it. And that's one of the only, I think, when you look at supplements and medications, a lot of them change our internal production of something, but melatonin doesn't. The tough thing about it in the US is that it's not FDA regulated, so there can be other things, and those other things that are in the melatonin are, they the companies are supposed to say what's in them, but nobody's necessarily checking. So there is a symbol, the US Pharmacopoeia, I think, Association, and it's like a little symbol that you'll see on the front of the box. Again, companies voluntarily test their products with this organization. But
Okay,
if
that's
you
good. And if it has,
Yeah,
that doesn't mean it's been
it means it's
tested
been
and
tested
verified.
through.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. But again, it's not the FDA. So when I hear people say we tried melatonin, it was great for a week and then it stopped working, I think my brain goes, I wonder if there was a little Benadryl in that, because melatonin doesn't work that way, but a lot of antihistamines do work that way when it comes to
Okay.
sleep.
And is that a thing that manufacturers are doing, putting a little Benadryl in it? Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
definitely,
Okay.
or just any other things. The second thing about it is, as I mentioned, it's really designed to help fall asleep. It doesn't last all night unless you take an extended release version, which there are extended release versions. In general, that is on the coating of a tablet, and so you have to be able to swallow pills to get that extended release effect. There is now a gummy that purports to have that effect, and basically, they're saying it's the size of the molecule, so you're digesting it at a different rate. There is some legitimacy to that idea, but I don't know that you could really say, "Okay, this lasts 6 hours," or whatever.
Okay.
The other thing about the gummies is not this one wasn't part of this study that I know of, but the gummies were studied recently, and only about 10% of melatonin gummies had the melatonin that they said were in there.
Oh,
So I typically discourage using the gummies. I think some families that I work with have had good luck with the extended release gummies if you have a younger child. But if
what
you
about
can't,
drops?
I think the drops are okay, the chewable's okay, the pills are okay. It's really just the gummies that
Okay.
are. Yeah.
Questionable on whether they're delivering
Right.
the right amount. Okay, got it.
Right. And so melatonin is pretty well studied. Other supplements are not as well studied. People ask a lot recently about magnesium, and in adults, I think it's been shown to be a little bit to be somewhat helpful. The magnesium that our bodies produce is great. The magnesium that you take as a supplement in kids, the research isn't out there yet.
Okay.
So I don't think we can say that. As far as other supplements, those haven't really been shown to impact sleep. And I just worry if they're not studied well enough that they could be impacting not just sleep, but other things. On the other hand, I want to say that I know as a parent, and I said this in the beginning, sometimes we have to think about we have to think outside the box. And
Yeah.
so if it's not something that's harmful and you want to try it and it's safe, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I would try the behavioral strategies and the other supplements that have been well studied that have an evidence base before I would go outside of the box. But I think if it's safe and there isn't a risk of, side effects or something, sometimes we just have to try it.
Yeah. Okay. You also talked though about how neurodiverse kids can be deficient
Yeah.
in certain, just looking at their whole person again, and that, like, so if they're low on vitamin D,
Yeah.
B's, and
Yeah.
supplementing that piece can just
Right.
help
I
the
think that
overall person kind of run better, which may improve things happening for sleeping, right? That kind of
right.
thing.
And I think so. Let's talk about vitamin D, for example. Blanket giving your child vitamin D hasn't really been shown to improve sleep. But if you're deficient in vitamin D, then that has been shown to impact sleep. So it
Yeah.
really
Okay.
just depends on what's already going on there.
Yeah.
And that's similar to even medications that are used very much off label right now in terms of autism in particular, not so much ADHD, but is there a deficiency? Is there something going on in the brain? And if there is, what can we do to correct it? But that doesn't mean that it's good for any kid, that vitamin D is just going to help any kid.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Hmm.
Yeah, really good. Okay, this has been a fabulous conversation. As we wrap up, I mean, we haven't even scratched the surface on all of just really understanding how to support our kids who are neurodiverse with ADHD to help them go to sleep. And it is really important because it does support everything. It
Mhm.
supports mood. It supports our executive functioning that we
Absolutely.
need during the day. It supports everything. So, as we wrap up, what would be your final words of wisdom for parents who are trying to figure this out and navigate the road with their kid and for their family so everybody's getting the proper rest that they need?
Yeah. I would start with a bedtime routine. I know that seems kind of like tired old advice, but I would start with a bedtime routine. I think it's really important. I also wouldn't hesitate to look for a sleep center at, a hospital or university. You can start with your pediatrician. And then I would say there are lots of very reputable organizations out there that provide guidelines for how much sleep kids should be getting. I would use those loosely and more think about how is my child functioning? Are they falling asleep in school? Can they be in the car for 10 minutes without falling asleep? Are they able to get their homework done? Are they in a really, really bad mood when they wake up in the morning? I would really look at how they're doing
Yeah.
and less at this chart tells me they should be getting 11 and they're getting 10. I would think about more how they're functioning.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of the functioning is, are they able to get up in the morning? And are they
Yeah,
able to go to sleep? Right?
right.
To
Well, I would
seek
say,
outside support or find the patterns
yeah,
of
exactly. And
to
just to
look
help,
at
because,
this.
as I mentioned with the sleep associations, this isn't necessarily intuitive. Some of these,
Yeah.
biological body processes, sleep processes are not things that you would just automatically know. And again, why would you?
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you would, but especially post-COVID, I think there is a lot of virtual help out there. So finding a sleep specialist is probably easier than it was before COVID. Not to say that it's easy everywhere, but
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think the world has changed greatly since 2020 as
mhm,
far as being
mhm,
able to access information and people sharing information too, the experts
right,
sharing what they know
right.
and making it more accessible, even though
And
but then you gotta use your own discernment of what's
you do,
true.
and I would just I know there's so much of this advice, but I would try not to get your advice from ChatGPT or Claude or TikTok. I on one of your previous podcasts, someone was talking about what an expert is. What is an expert? And in the sleep world, even psychologists, we have a special board certification in behavioral sleep medicine. So I would look for someone who is credentialed in that way, who is a licensed psychologist, who is, a certified behavior therapist,
Yeah,
something like that. Because there are a lot of, there's just a lot of misinformation out
yeah.
there. It's hard to wade through.
Okay, give us what's the another credential to make sure that they are certified as a sleep specialist? Is it a
I think that if you go to any sleep center at a children's hospital, and there are websites that will tell you what these sleep centers are. There's the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the AASM, there's the National Sleep Foundation. There's another website that's very good called babysleep.com, and it is aimed for younger children. However, you can find a sleep specialist in your region on that website. So that's babysleep.com. Easy to remember.
yeah, okay.
So, yeah, I would really look for that. Also, a good cognitive behavioral therapist in general can probably help you with those things if you're in an area where there aren't sleep specialists.
Okay. And can you do some sleep therapy or sleep guidance? I know you work in a couple of different states.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
you can do it do treatment through Zoom
Absolutely.
effectively? Okay.
I think that sleep is actually one of those areas that is still effectively treated virtually, depending on what the underlying issue is. But it's really us giving recommendations because I don't know any sleep experts that are on Zoom in the middle of the night with you in a moment. And so, in general, that advice is going to be, here are things that you can try tonight. Let's try this. Let's see what happens when you do this. So I think that virtual advice is a lot of times just as good.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good. Well, thank you, Melissa. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.